have a question here. We skipped over some of the content about the logging your hours in those 6 categories. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about just the process of recording your IDP hours and,
Sure.
and advocating for yourself in order to make sure that you are getting the appropriate hours in the different categories?
So this is back to IDP, and one thing I will say before, Frank, you I'm sure have a lot to say about this, but back a few years ago they made a rule change. It used to be that you could log your hours pretty much any time. Like people were doing it 5-6 years after they had done the work, and it was kind of horrible. Speaking as a licensed architect who had a lot of people under coming to
architects are notorious procrastinators.
And I'd get
They're
somebody and they'd come up and they'd send me an email saying, "Hi Mike, this is Beth. I worked with you 7 years ago. Can you sign?" And like, oh my God, I can't even remember who Beth is. You're trying to figure out what they worked on. It was a disaster, and they thankfully, though it's made life a little complicated for some folks, but they thankfully made it so that now you have to essentially keep up to date with
well, unfortunately, a lot of longtime interns, which there are many of, find themselves with their pants down on this because they didn't realize this was happening. And all of a sudden it snuck up on them, and now they can't record the time that they always intended to record, but never got around to doing it. So here again, NCARB has softened their approach to this a little bit. It used to be 6 months for quite a while now, a few years now. It used to be 6 months. It had to be contemporaneous reporting of your time experience. And then they give you a 2-month grace period, so it's really 8 months. So an experience you had 8 months ago, you can record now. That's the rule. But what they have changed, which is in effect, is that they will give you half credit for the time before that 8 months. So if you had credit back to 5 years. So if you had some time 5 years ago, you could come to Mike and say, "Remember Mike when I worked for you 5 years ago?
Hey Beth."
And I just want half the time that I spent. And that you will, as long as your supervisor will agree to that and sign off on it, because they remember you.
And they haven't moved on.
Then you will get that credit for half the time. So it's not totally lost.
Yeah.
But it is totally lost beyond the 5 years.
Yeah. And I think that's a reasonable kind of mix between the two.
5 years seems like a long time, but I know that from my experience in talking to interns, many of them just postpone longer than 5 years.
Yeah, and it just
they
for
don't
whatever
record
reason.
at all. They never signed up for IDP. They didn't know IDP existed.
So the gist of the situation is that you have an IDP account on the NCARB site, and that your supervisor has an account also, and that you essentially submit you go on, there's like a little form you fill out.
Well, the supervisor doesn't have to have an account. What they do is NCARB will email your supervisor with a request for verification of the time that you spent. So you do it all online. You go into your account, record the hours online. That information gets emailed to your supervisor, and the supervisor will email back. I had one situation where a supervisor didn't have email a couple years ago. There's no way to get in touch with him through email. So NCARB kindly allowed that person to fax in the information.
Pony Express, something?
Yeah, Pony Express, right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was kind of a strange thing. You'd think everybody has email these days, but some of these old-time guys still don't have it.
So the trick here is you just start your NCARB IDP account. There's a whole sort of process to doing that. It's fairly simple and straightforward. And then once you've got work going, you establish who your supervisor is. It can be a couple different people, but generally people do it with one person, I think. I don't know if that's true. Is that reasonable?
No, you can do it as many people as you want who supervise your work. So you record the work, and then you list the person who is your supervisor. And keep in mind that the supervisor has to be licensed. Although they've softened up a little bit on that licensure. It used to be that they had to be licensed in the same state
and
which you're working. Now it could be any state.
Which is handy given the way that offices work now, because there's so many people working across state lines.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
And so once you've set up that account, then you just sort of find a regular rhythm. They're not going to make it happen. You have to make it happen. So you I think the 6-month thing, even if it's not a total requirement, I would still use that. Find maybe it's your birthday and your half birthday or something, or sometime in June and then sometime in December, is find a way that you sort of always go through, get the stuff logged in and make it happen.
If I were recommending to somebody, I would say do it every month.
Yeah, actually month
that
is
way
probably
you
smarter.
remember what you've done.
It's really
6 months is a long time.
It's surprisingly hard to remember. If you've worked on 3 or 4 different projects, man, it gets complicated. What happened, 5 months ago on project number 3. Monthly certainly makes sense. And find some system that works for you. Maybe you do it on the 1st of every month, or maybe you do it, whatever it is. But you find a system. Then you fill it out, you submit it. NCARB will automatically, as Frank said, send it to the supervisor in that case. They then have a certain period of time to respond, which is pretty generous.
I have to say that I have had, it's very generous. They don't have to respond right away. So your 6-month period is from when you file it, not from when they sign. I think that's important.
Which, speaking as somebody who signs these things, I'm happy about that.
Yeah, and I've had interns call me and say, my supervisor won't sign it because I got fired, so he won't sign it anymore. And I've had several people call me about that. And I said, well, it's their obligation to. They have no choice. They can't decide.
Yeah, if you've done the work and you've done it successfully and all of that.
And how do you enforce that? Well, in my case, I tell them to have them call me, and I'll talk to them about their requirements to do that. If that doesn't get the action, if they don't call me, I said the only way to do it is to file a labor complaint against them. That gets them moving.
Yeah, and that will definitely get them moving. I would absolutely start with.
This doesn't happen very often, I have to say.
Talk to the folks at AIA or something like that, and somebody will be like Frank, who will be in a sort of position of authority and can throw some gravitas.
Yeah, I should mention that the advisors, and there are several in Illinois. I'm the state advisor, but there are also associate advisors who work for firms, and so you can go to them. Or there are educational advisors who are teachers, and you can go to them as well.
Yeah.
And we've got about 6 advisors, I think, in Illinois.
Or really just anybody who's sort of reasonable and got some mojo, got some gravitas that can have a reasonable conversation with somebody.
I think your first step would be if you're in school to go to the education advisor.
But that is a rare situation. So
it is. It's very rare, but it does happen, I have to say. So. Keep in good, this is the lesson here, keep in good relationships with your firms.
Yes.
Don't burn any bridges.
Don't burn bridges. That's actually great advice. People don't understand how good advice that is. That is a huge deal. If you can go back and talk, use the work from that project for your portfolio, if you can use them as a networking process, life will always be better if you can make that be a positive experience.